A throne sits empty as the city burns below. The ruler is not dead, nor has he fled. He is merely indifferent. He did nothing to start the fire, and he does nothing to stop it. This inaction is his only policy. How can a man who commits no evil oversee the greatest destruction? And how can this hollow crown be the most dangerous weapon of all? The answer is a lesson in the architecture of ruin. There exists a type of ruler, celebrated in naive philosophies and children's fables. He is the idealist, the benevolent spectator. His great virtue, he believes, is his restraint, a philosophy he wears like a crown of laurels. He governs with a light touch, convinced that problems like rivers will eventually find their own way to the sea without the need for dams or levees. He mistakes indifference for patience, inaction for wisdom. He hears the whispers of discontent in his court and calls it healthy debate, a sign of an open and tolerant regime. He sees the rising price of bread in the market and considers it a temporary fluctuation of commerce, a regrettable but natural cycle that will correct itself. He observes the formation of factions among his nobles, the quiet meetings in shadowed corridors, and calls it the natural expression of a vibrant political life. His entire worldview is built upon a single catastrophic assumption: the fundamental goodness of men. He believes their loyalty is a constant, a given, as reliable as the rising of the sun. He is convinced that to intervene, to act preemptively against a perceived threat, would be an act of tyranny, a stain upon his benevolent legacy. Why crush a snake while it is still in the egg? He asks his concerned advisors. Perhaps it will not hatch. Perhaps it will not be venomous. To act on suspicion is to rule by fear, and I wish to be loved. This desire to be loved, however, is the very foundation of his ruin, for his subjects do not interpret his inaction as love. They interpret it as a profound and insulting absence. His indifference is not perceived as benevolence, but as weakness. His passivity is not seen as wisdom, but as impotence, or worse, as contempt for their very real struggles. The people at first are merely confused. They look to the palace for a sign, for a decision, for the steady hand of authority that signals someone is in control. They find nothing but an unnerving silence. This silence is a void, and into this void, fear begins to creep and then to flood. The minor dispute over grain left unattended by the state is not resolved. It festers, turning neighbor against neighbor until the first blood is spilled. The merchant's greed, unchecked by regulation or decree, becomes rampant exploitation, and the cries of the poor are met with the hollow echo of the empty throne room. The people's hunger, ignored by the man who feasts in the palace, turns from simmering rage into a tangible, violent force. The noble's whispers, unpunished and therefore encouraged, become a full-throated conspiracy, as they see a leader too weak to even defend his own power. He has, through his passivity, invited the wolves into his flock and given them silent permission to feast. He has set the stage for panic, not by an act of cruelty, but by a complete and total absence of will. The world, as Niccolò Machiavelli understood, is not governed by how men should be, but by how they are. And the idealist, in his arrogant refusal to see this reality, becomes the architect of his own demise and the gravedigger of his own state. The fire that consumes his city was not lit by his enemies, but by his own vacant stare. Now let us discard the fable and enter the real world, the world of the prince. Machiavelli offers not a moral philosophy for the salvation of the soul, but a pragmatic manual for the preservation of the state. His first and most crucial lesson is this: the primary duty of a ruler is not to be good, but to be effective. The survival and stability of the state is the highest good, an end against which all actions must be judged. The prince understands that indifference is not a policy, it is a declaration of surrender to the forces of chaos. He must therefore be a student of anticipation, a master of foresight. For Machiavelli warns that political disorders are like consumption, the hectic fever that is, in the beginning, easy to cure but difficult to detect. But in the course of time, not having been detected or treated in the beginning, it becomes easy to detect but difficult to cure. The indifferent ruler waits until the city is in flames, when the problem is obvious to all, but the solution is impossible. The prince, however, seeks the scent of smoke long before any fire is visible. He is not a spectator, He is a physician to the body politic, and his gaze is relentlessly diagnostic. He understands that men are fickle, ungrateful, and driven by self-interest. To trust their innate loyalty is to build a fortress on shifting sand. Therefore, he does not concern himself with being loved, an emotion dependent on the whims of others and a bond that is easily broken for personal gain. He concerns himself with being respected and, if necessary, feared, a state of being he alone controls. His vigilance is not paranoia, it is the essential tool of his craft. Where the idealist sees healthy debate, the prince sees the formation of rival power centers that must be managed, co-opted, or dismantled before they can challenge his authority. Where the idealist sees a market fluctuation, the prince sees the potential for a riot that can topple his government. He acts immediately, not waiting for starvation to set in. He secures the state's grain reserves, makes a public show of punishing hoarders with theatrical severity, and subsidizes the price of bread, demonstrating his absolute control over the people's most basic needs. He does not wait for the snake to hatch. He finds the nest and pulverizes the eggs, understanding that a single swift act of what the naive may call cruelty can prevent 1,000 greater cruelties born from the chaos of a civil war. He learns, as Machiavelli advises, how not to be good, and to use this knowledge or not according to the dictates of necessity. This is the core of his power, the moral flexibility to do what must be done. The observation of human nature, in its raw and unfiltered state, is the first and most powerful weapon in the arsenal of a true ruler. It is the solid granite foundation upon which all lasting strategy is built. For the indifferent ruler trusts in the loyalty of his people, a bond of obligation which men, being wretched creatures, break whenever it serves their purpose. But the vigilant prince trusts only in his own foresight, a foundation of control that never fails. Comment Order from Chaos to master this principle and subscribe for the coming lessons on the architecture of power. To merely possess a vigilant mind is insufficient. A watchman who sees the approaching army but has no walls to defend or weapons to wield is nothing more than the first witness to a massacre. The prince, therefore, does not simply watch, he builds. His power is not a passive inheritance, but a deliberate and tireless construction, a fortress of strategy designed to withstand the inevitable storms of fate. To understand this architecture is to understand the three great pillars that support any enduring state: the taming of fortune by the force of virtue, the calculated duality of the lion and the fox, and the unwavering maintenance of the state's foundations. The passive ruler neglects all three, believing his throne stands on solid ground, unaware that he is presiding over a structure slowly sinking into a swamp of his own making. First, we must examine the eternal conflict between virtù and fortuna. Fortune is the wild, untamed river of circumstance, unpredictable, violent, and utterly indifferent to the plans of men. She is the source of plagues, of sudden invasions, of bad harvests, of the betrayal you never saw coming. The indifferent ruler sees himself as a helpless bystander on the riverbank. He prays for calm waters and curses the floods when they arrive, lamenting his terrible luck. He has surrendered his agency to the whims of chance. He is fortune's plaything. The master strategist, the prince of virtù, sees fortune not as a goddess to be worshipped, but as a force to be wrestled with, redirected, and even dominated. Virtù is human will made manifest. It is audacity, preparation, skill, and ruthless energy. The prince of virtù knows that the river will inevitably rise. So, in times of peace, when the indifferent ruler is resting, he is working. He builds dikes of military readiness, digs channels of political alliances, and constructs floodgates of economic reserves. He does not foolishly believe he can stop the rain from falling, but he can, through foresight and relentless effort, ensure that when the deluge comes, the water flows where he commands it to flow. Virtù is the strategic foresight to repair the roof during the sunny season. It is the discipline to train soldiers for a war that may never come, so that when it does, victory is a foregone conclusion. It is the wisdom to spend treasure shoring up defenses rather than on fleeting luxuries. For Machiavelli, fortune is a woman, And she is won by the bold, by the audacious, by the man who is willing to treat her roughly rather than the one who approaches her with timid reverence. The indifferent ruler is a cautious suitor. He waits for a clear sign, a perfect moment. The Prince of Virtu seizes her, imposing his will upon the chaos of the world, understanding that inaction is the only strategy guaranteed to be mastered by fate. The second pillar is the mastery of the two natures, the lion and the fox. Machiavelli observes that a prince must know how to use both the beast and the man. In the world of beasts, he must choose the fox and the lion. For the lion cannot defend himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Therefore, one must be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. The ruler defined by his indifference is neither. He lacks the cunning of the fox, for he pays no attention to the subtle snares being laid around him. He dismisses flattery as genuine praise, ignores the secret pacts made between his subordinates, and fails to read the subtext of diplomatic messages. He is blind to the trap until its jaws have already closed around his leg. At the same time, he lacks the ferocity of the lion. When a threat becomes too obvious to ignore, a minor rebellion, a challenge from a brazen nobleman, his response is hesitant and weak. He seeks negotiation where he should project absolute strength. He offers concessions where he should deliver a single decisive blow. This only emboldens his enemies, who see a beast with no teeth and no claws, fit only for slaughter. The true prince, however, is a master of this duality. As the fox, he is the supreme intelligence officer of his own state. His senses are always sharp. He cultivates networks of informants, not because he is paranoid, but because he knows information is the currency of power. He understands that a shift in a rival's trade policy may be the precursor to an economic war, that a popular new song sung in the taverns can signal a change in public sentiment, that an unexpected marriage between two powerful families is never about love, but about the consolidation of power. He sees the threads of conspiracy before they are woven into a rope for his own neck. But this cunning is useless without the accompanying strength. Once the fox has identified the threat, the lion must emerge. The lion's purpose is to make a show of overwhelming force, to demonstrate that the cost of challenging the state is annihilation. When a city rebels, the lion does not just retake it. He makes an example of it so that 10 other cities dare not even contemplate dissent. When a commander is found to be treacherous, he is not quietly dismissed. He is dealt with in a public and terrifying manner, a lesson in loyalty written in blood for all to see. The lion's roar is a strategic tool, a form of communication that is universally understood. The prince who is only a fox will be seen as duplicitous and weak, easily overthrown if cornered. The prince who is only a lion will be seen as a brutish thug, easily outmaneuvered. The prince who is both, who can be as cunning as he is ferocious, who knows when to set a trap and when to attack head-on, becomes a figure of profound and unpredictable power. His enemies can never be sure which animal they are facing, and this uncertainty is his greatest shield. Finally, the third and most vital pillar is the unglamorous, unending work of maintaining the foundations of the state. Indifference is a solvent that corrodes these foundations until the entire edifice collapses. The first foundation is good laws, which to a passive ruler are merely suggestions. He allows the wealthy to bend them, the powerful to ignore them, and fails to enforce them with any consistency. This teaches the people a fatal lesson, that justice is a lie, and that survival depends not on the law but on personal power. This breeds a deep, systemic cynicism that rots the state from within. The vigilant prince understands law is the skeleton of the state. It must be rigid and unyielding. Its application must be swift and predictable, for the certainty of punishment is a far greater deterrent than its severity. The second foundation is a reliable military. The indifferent sovereign takes his army for granted. He lets their training slide, their pay fall into arrears, and their loyalty wander. He sees the military as a cost, not an investment. Consequently, when the crisis he failed to prevent arrives, he discovers his army is a hollow shell, or worse, a mercenary force whose allegiance has been purchased by his enemies. The prince knows that a loyal and formidable military is the final argument of the state. He ensures his soldiers are the best equipped, the best trained, and that their loyalty is sworn directly to him, the embodiment of the state they serve. The third foundation, and the one most directly destroyed by indifference, is the bond between the ruler and the ruled. The idealist seeks love. The tyrant demands obedience through sheer terror. The indifferent ruler, seeking nothing, earns the most dangerous sentiment of all, contempt. Contempt is the acid that dissolves all authority. A people who despise their leader as weak, incompetent, and disconnected will not rise to defend him. They will stand aside and watch him fall, and may even aid his enemies. The prince avoids this by cultivating a powerful reputation. He may not be loved, but his competence is respected. He may be feared, but he is feared because he is effective, and his actions, however harsh, are seen as necessary for the stability and security of all. This respect, backed by a credible threat of force, is the cement that holds the state together. It transforms a resentful populace into a compliant, productive, and stable society. A people who understand that the order he provides, however stern, is infinitely preferable to the terrifying panic that reigns in his absence. Having erected the external pillars of his dominion, the prince must turn his attention inward to a realm far more treacherous than any battlefield, the landscape of the human mind. For the state is not merely a collection of territories and armies, it is a complex web of perceptions, fears, and beliefs. To govern the state, one must first govern this invisible kingdom. The greatest war a sovereign ever fights is not against a foreign invader, but against his own human inclinations toward ease and conventional morality. And his greatest instrument of control is not the sword, but the masterful manipulation of public perception. Here in the theater of the mind is where the indifferent ruler suffers his most profound collapse. For his stage is empty, his script is unwritten, and his audience has long since turned against him. The first and most intimate victory for any true leader is the conquest of the self. The human soul naturally recoils from the harsh necessities of power. It hesitates, it seeks comfort, it yearns for the simple clarity of a world divided into good and evil. The indifferent ruler is a slave to this yearning. His inaction is not a philosophy, it is the symptom of a profound internal weakness. He avoids difficult decisions not out of wisdom, but out of a paralyzing fear of being disliked, of making a mistake, of bearing the heavy burden of consequence. He is a man perpetually at war with the duties of his office, and his solution is to surrender, to retreat into the comfortable fortress of apathy. This is a battle the prince must win decisively, and every single day. He must cultivate within his own mind an ice-cold sanctum of pure calculation, a place where the clamor of sentiment and the whispers of guilt cannot reach. Like a surgeon who must cut into living flesh to save a life, the prince must develop a form of detached empathy, understanding the pains of his people without allowing those pains to cloud his strategic judgment. He must learn to see morality not as a set of immutable laws handed down from heaven, but as a spectrum of tools, to be used or set aside as necessity dictates. This does not make him evil. It makes him effective. His first duty is to the health and longevity of the state, a living entity that is always his primary patient. The hesitation that costs a general a battle or a king a kingdom is born from this internal conflict. The prince ends this conflict by choosing his master. It is not his conscience but his objective. He conquers his own reluctance to perform necessary cruelties, his own desire for rest when vigilance is required, his own vanity that craves genuine love over manufactured respect. This internal dominion is the source of his unnerving calm in the face of crisis, his ability to act with terrifying speed while others are frozen by doubt. He has won the war within himself and is therefore prepared to command the world outside. With this internal discipline established, the prince steps onto the public stage, not as a man, but as a symbol. He understands a truth that eludes the passive idealist. The masses do not respond to reality, but to the performance of reality. Their loyalty, their fear, and their panic are all governed by the narrative they are told and shown. The central question of this performance is the timeless dilemma. Is it better to be loved or to be feared? The indifferent ruler, in his quest for love, achieves neither. His negligence breeds not affection, but a corrosive contempt. He is seen as a fool, a non-entity, and contempt is the poison that dissolves all authority. The people may not love a harsh master, but they will never follow one they do not respect. Machiavelli's logic is brutally pragmatic. Love is a bond of gratitude, held by a chain of obligation which, because men are by nature wicked, is broken on every occasion for their own profit. But fear is a bond of apprehension, held by the dread of punishment which never fails. A prince, therefore, must build his house on the rock of fear, not the sand of affection. However, this is not a crude call for monstrous tyranny. The prince's objective is to be feared, but never, under any circumstances, to be hated. Hatred is an active, volatile emotion that fuels conspiracies and rebellions. Fear is a passive, cautionary state that ensures compliance. The line between them is fine, but absolute, and the prince must be a master at walking it. How does one avoid hatred? Machiavelli is explicit. A sovereign must abstain from the property of his citizens and subjects and from their women. A man will sooner forget the death of his father than the loss of his inheritance. By guaranteeing the security of property and family, the ruler removes the most common sources of deep-seated resentment. Furthermore, any necessary cruelties must be executed with surgical precision. They must be swift, severe, and appear to be in the service of public security, not personal malice. They are a bitter medicine for the state, not the self-indulgent poison of a tyrant. When the people believe the prince's severity serves the cause of order, they will fear his wrath but respect his purpose. The indifferent ruler, ironically, generates far more hatred. His failure to enforce laws makes all property insecure. His weakness invites chaos which harms families indiscriminately. The populace comes to hate him not for what he has done, but for what he has failed to do. They hate him for his absence. The fear inspired by the prince is the fear of a predictable, orderly power. The hatred inspired by his counterpart is the product of unpredictable, terrifying chaos. Finally, the prince must become a master of the facade, a grand architect of his own reputation. Every public appearance, every decree, every reported gesture is a calculated piece of theater designed to project an image of command and virtue. For men in general, Machiavelli writes, judge more by the eyes than by the hands. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. The prince must therefore appear to possess the 5 great virtues, even if he cannot afford to practice them at all times. He must appear merciful, often by making a great show of pardoning a minor criminal while quietly eliminating a major threat. He must appear faithful, honoring minor agreements with elaborate ceremony to build a reputation for reliability that he can exploit when a major betrayal becomes necessary. He must appear humane, making public donations to the poor or visiting the sick, creating a reservoir of goodwill that insulates him from accusations of cruelty. He must appear upright and honest, speaking the language of justice and integrity, ensuring the law is seen as his guide, even as he bends it to his will in the shadows. And above all, he must appear religious, for the mantle of divine favor is the most powerful armor a ruler can wear. The indifferent ruler has no such artifice. He appears as he is, distracted, uninterested, and weak. His authentic self is his undoing. The prince, by contrast, understands that his reputation is his greatest asset. It is a weapon that demoralizes his enemies and a shield that deflects the anger of his people. It is the carefully constructed mask that allows him to do what is necessary to prevent panic and maintain the state, while still being perceived as the guardian of order and the paragon of virtue. This is the great paradox of his power. The more convincing the illusion, the more solid the reality of his control becomes. You have been guided through the internal fortress of the prince's mind and shown the levers of public perception. You have learned how the foundations of power are laid and why the spectator king is destined to fall. Now, before we unveil the final decisive act of forging a legacy in stone, ensure you are subscribed. For the ultimate wisdom, the transition from mere ruler to the architect of an era is reserved for those prepared to act. The knowledge is useless without the will to build. The moment of truth for any sovereign is not one of protracted debate or gradual reform, but the instant of decisive action. This is the master stroke. For the indifferent ruler, this moment is always a desperate reaction. It is the panicked order to execute rioters when the city is already burning, a spasm of violence born from neglect. It is too little, too late, and it only serves to pour fuel on the flames of hatred. For the prince, the masterstroke is the complete opposite. It is an act of breathtaking proactivity, a preventative strike of such strategic elegance that its true purpose is often invisible to the masses. It is the purest expression of virtù, seizing an opportunity that fortuna has provided. It is not merely a blow against an existing enemy, but a fundamental restructuring of the political landscape to eliminate the very possibility of a future threat. This is where the prince's study of anticipation bears its ultimate fruit. He sees the potential for famine, not when the harvests fail, but when a handful of wealthy merchants begin quietly consolidating control over the grain trade. The indifferent ruler sees only commerce. The prince sees the assembly of a weapon that can be used to starve his city and hold his throne hostage. He does not wait. In a single, coordinated operation, his forces seize the merchants' granaries, nationalizing them for the good of the state. He does not imprison all of them. That would be inefficient and create a class of martyrs. Instead, he selects the 2 or 3 most powerful and audacious among them and executes them publicly for the crime of treason against the people. The charge is not hoarding, but conspiracy. The evidence is irrelevant. The spectacle is everything. This is the application of Machiavelli's timeless advice. Injuries ought to be done all at once, so that being tasted less, they offend less. Benefits ought to be given little by little, so that the flavor of them may last longer. The shock of the seizure and the executions is a single sharp wound to the body politic. It is terrifying, it is memorable, and it is over. Then, immediately, the benefits begin to trickle out. The prince announces the creation of a state-run granary, guaranteeing a stable and fair price for bread for all time. The first distribution of grain is a public celebration. The people, who are on the cusp of a fear they could not yet name, are suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude. They have been saved from a crisis they never even knew was coming. The prince is not seen as a tyrant who seized private property, but as a savior who protected the populace from predatory elites. He has inflicted the injury and provided the cure in a single motion, consolidating his power and earning the fierce loyalty that comes from being the sole guarantor of the people's survival. But the true genius of the prince is not revealed in the violence of the stroke, but in the silent, methodical construction that follows. Victory is a fleeting event. Stability is a permanent condition. The indifferent ruler, had he by some miracle survived such a crisis, would have relaxed, believing the danger had passed. This is the fatal error of the amateur. For the prince, the masterstroke is not an end, but a beginning. It has created a power vacuum and a moment of profound political plasticity. He does not let this moment pass. He immediately begins to build the new order. The state granary is not just a temporary measure. It becomes a permanent institution of government, with its own bureaucracy, its own guards, and its own laws, all loyal directly to the crown. It gives him direct control over the food supply, the ultimate source of social stability. He uses the confiscated wealth of the executed merchants to fund a new public work, perhaps a bridge or an aqueduct, a project that employs thousands and stands as a permanent, physical testament to his benevolence and foresight. The families of the remaining merchants, terrified and broken, are compelled to pledge a portion of their profits to this project, transforming their potential for rebellion into a public display of fealty. He does not stop there. He understands that a new order requires new rules and new men. He elevates a new class of administrators, men of talent and ambition, chosen not from the old noble families, but from the common people. Their loyalty is absolute, for he is the sole source of their power and prestige. They have no independent authority. Their entire existence is tied to his success. They become his eyes and ears, the nerve endings of the state, ensuring his will is executed flawlessly in every corner of the realm. He rewrites the laws governing commerce, creating regulations that explicitly prevent the kind of consolidation that led to the crisis in the first place. He does not outlaw wealth, but he makes it clear that any accumulation of private power that could rival the power of the state is an existential threat and will be treated as such. The goal is not merely to win the battle, but to redesign the battlefield itself. making future conflicts of the same nature impossible. This is the essence of consolidation, to transform a momentary advantage gained through decisive action into a permanent, self-perpetuating structure of control. The prince does not rest. He builds his institutions, codifies his power, and establishes the foundations of a dominion that will outlast him, a state that is an engine of stability, designed to resist the relentless entropy of time and the chaotic nature of humanity. Here, then, is the final philosophical truth. Power is not a matter of goodness or evil, but of efficacy. Its supreme expression is not found in the thunderous response to a calamitous event, but in the profound silence of the crisis that was wholly averted. The indifferent ruler is remembered by the disasters that defined his reign, the Great Famine, the bloody uprising, the ruinous civil war. His legacy is a cautionary tale, a chronicle of panic. The great prince, the master strategist, is remembered quite differently. His reign might be called uneventful, even boring, by those who mistake drama for greatness. There were no catastrophic famines, for he controlled the food. There were no major rebellions, for he neutralized threats in their infancy. His genius is measured not by the storms he weathered, but by the storms that never formed on his horizon. He saw the world as it was, in all its brutal and unforgiving clarity, and had the courage to act according to that vision. He understood that the ultimate duty of a sovereign is to be the unwavering sentinel against chaos, to impose human will upon a world that defaults to disorder. The throne he built is more than a seat of authority. It is the anchor of his state, a point of absolute stability in a perpetually turbulent sea. His legacy is not written in fire and blood, but in the quiet, uninterrupted prosperity of his people and the enduring strength of the order he forged. That is the ultimate victory. That is the construction of a throne that lasts.